thinking about the political situation, our need to address things in a much broader sense, societal sense, even before the election. I started thinking, this is going to be a close election. I thought we'd win it, but even if we had won by only 2 or 3 or even 10%, it still suggests some real problems in our country and our society. And after the election, people started saying immediately, the response as well, if Democrats had done this, if Biden dropped out sooner, if we'd done our advertising better, had better social media presence, whatever. I mean, there are a lot of reasons, a lot of purely political and presumably addressable reasons why we lost this election. But that still does not deal with the basic underlying problem, is that in a country, nearly half of the people could even consider voting for Donald Trump, given his not just his political history, but who he is and what he stands for. And then immediately we started hearing from the Republican commentators saying, "Oh, Democrats are disarray. This is a realigning election. We're going to be in power forever, and it won't be a Democratic presidency in the next 50 years." And of course, that's pure nonsense. Reality is that Trump got less than 50% of the vote by a little bit. And probably the only reason that he did that well in the popular vote is that the Democrats basically didn't campaign in any safe states or safely lost states. Trump did go into New York and Texas and North Carolina and brought out the vote there, and Democrats kind of ignored all the states. I think if they had done some campaigning in New York and California, and some of the other states, and even Texas, that they probably would have gotten a majority of the popular vote. That still, that wouldn't have still won the election, but for them to say that this is a huge Republican sweeping victory is untrue. And even the mainstream media, at least for a while, were saying, "Oh, this is a huge Republican victory." It was, it was tiny. It was the closest election in 40 years. And the first one, the Republicans have actually won the popular vote in 20 years. But there are bigger problems. Part of it is that when people ask the public what they believe in, who they prefer, what positions they prefer, without stating Democrats or Republicans, just how do you feel about healthcare? How do you feel about the environment, about dealing with global warming, gay rights, taxation issues, income distribution? Between 70 and 80% of the people prefer Democratic positions to Republican positions. And even in some of the things that are more controversial, issues involving what to do with trans people and the tiny number of people that are involved in playing sports when they're trans, on immigration, on how to handle the immigrants who have come in, without documentation. It's not that big a percentage, but it's still a majority of people that prefer the Democratic positions. Ditto on abortion, actually, but that's probably over 70% that prefer the Democratic positions. So, I mean, I can think of very few actual issues in which a majority of people prefer Republicans. And yet somehow they're voting for them. And more specifically, when you're thinking about Donald Trump, how do you have a society which we consider to be a good society, as one person on our crew said, a guiding, shining light, as he remembered it growing up, that doesn't seem to be there anymore. How in a society like this are half the people willing to vote for a president who lies about everything, who openly spews hatred toward ethnic and religious minorities, has a history of declaring bankruptcy to cheat contractors out of pay or services, cozies up to enemies, declared enemies like Russia and North Korea, while antagonizing our long-term allies, has a history of sexual misconduct, makes a huge amount of money as president by encouraging foreign visitors to stay at his properties, and for mandating the people that are protecting and defending him when he visits again to stay in the properties he owns at a greatly inflated price. Who declares election a victory clearly lost? Who denies universally accepted scientific truths? Who encourages behaviors that lead to the excess deaths during an epidemic? And so, my question is, why is that? And who is to blame for that? And, I just look at a long list of players in society that probably could be doing something better. Clergy, educators, the media, parents who helicopter their children and make them afraid of everything. Because when you grow up to be afraid, you're willing to vote for a quote, strong man who will protect you over somebody who will give you freedom. Businesses, control of the media, and I certainly don't have answers, but it seems like the Democrats are at least, I mean, this isn't entirely true, but the conception of Democrats is that the Democratic voters are the better educated people, the smarter people, if only because of their education. So why are we losing when we should have all of the best and brightest minds? And it's my feeling that, and this is not all on us Muleskinners, all of us Democratic activists, but all of us in society ought to be looking at these issues and how we've gotten there and how we fix these. And so that's kind of what I was thinking, and I would love to hear from the rest of you guys and see what's on your minds and what solutions should there be, and how do we get all of these various aspects of society to work on this problem? Because if we don't, then we're going to look a lot like Senegal and Liberia and places that I really don't want to live in. And I will open that up to discussion. Your turn.
Well, one thing that I think is that unfortunately we're going to have to be on social media a lot more than we have been, because that's where people are. I think social media has done a lot of damage to our society. So it's kind of like condoning it to be on there, but that's where you can reach so many people. And right now they're being fed so much right-wing misinformation and information. And that there was a writer whose theory is that was really why we lost the election, is that the majority of the media in this country is now very right-wing. And that's the diet that people were being fed. And the majority of the media, and also all the podcasts and the social media networks, there's so much right-wing influence that's why people were believing some of Trump's lies, because they're being amplified and repeated on those stories. And he made a lot of sense. And I think I don't know what we can do. I mean, we can try to be on those platforms. I don't know what we can do to try to control the media more, unless we can get Democrats with money to buy more of the media. Well,
that was one of the articles I read. The solution is why don't Democrat billionaires buy a lot of radio stations? But I think that seems a little bit simplistic, and I'm not sure that the Republican billionaires who basically own 90%, 95% of the media are going to be willing to sell them to Democratic billionaires.
Right.
But if you're a truck driver or a farmer driving around listening to radio all day, 95% of what you are exposed to is right wing, and that's got to make a difference, especially if you don't follow politics too closely, and it's not just the lies they tell, it's the stuff they leave out. And kind of what I wonder, you know, the long list of things, anti-Trump things I just read off, you know, is there a very substantial portion of the electorate who actually has never even heard those things or doesn't believe them because they're coming
Right.
from sources that they don't trust?
Right.
On a personal level, I'll say my Trumpster brother is a mail carrier who is a Rush Limbaugh convert, and he really was. He worked for Bobby Kennedy back in the old days, and then after days and days of listening to Rush Limbaugh, he turned on us. So
Yeah.
just
Sue and Herb have their hands up.
It's Sue.
After you.
Oh, okay. Well, it's both of us. Okay. I was just going to say, I don't know how we combat Fox News, and I've said this a lot. I feel like, and it's not just Fox News, it's all these other magazines and whatever, the church related conservative church or evangelical churches are giving all sorts of things that are not accurate, and I don't know how we combat it. I do think on a local level, it's becoming more critical that we need to be sure that all of our local Democrats get re-voted in, and that we extend to so that we are more of a blue area. And we noticed from Brianna's talk that there is an increase of Republican influence in the less populated areas of our county. So it's going to be important that we try to retain many of the Republicans that we have locally. I think we also need to spread that, and this isn't so much for us because it's more of a broad thing, but we need to be doing as we have been a little bit more in recent years of trying to be sure that there are Democratic candidates in all the different local and state offices as best we can. And I think I would agree with the comment that Al made, that the fact that the National Party did not put money except in the states that they considered swing, I think that was a mistake. We have to get away from doing that. We have to honor everybody because it's not just focused on a certain area. Those are some of my thoughts. And Herb had some. Herb?
I should let reaction to your comments go
Okay.
first.
Okay.
Dave Mallory.
To write these things down because I forgot what my comment was. Sue, it was something Sue just said though that I didn't sound right. What was toward the end, Sue? You remember what you said? I was busy trying to find where the hand was on here, and I forgot that. If it comes back, oh, you're muted again, Sue. But
Well, I mentioned about the fact that the National didn't support all over.
that's right.
And I think as a party, we didn't along that line. The Republicans were smart of trying to get into different areas like they tried to on the judgeship here in our area this time.
But my question was on a national level, electoral votes is obviously what counts, and Trump won the swing states. Were there any blue states that went for Trump where the Republicans spent a lot of money in that we lost?
I haven't looked at that. Do you know? Herb?
Yes.
Yeah, Democratic
Democratic
Senate candidates outperformed Harris in almost all of the swing states by several percent, and I'm not really sure why.
I'm talking about the ones that were not swing states that, Sue suggested that national Democrats need to spend more money in Missouri. Well,
Yeah,
did the Republicans swing any solid blue states to red? If not, then why waste our money in there?
But more people voted Republican in, for instance, New York than they had in the past.
Okay, so for a long term, it might be a cumulative thing, but you're saying, it sounds like we need, Sue's argument was that we should, Democrats nationwide should spend more money in these safe states so that the Republicans don't take them. But they didn't take them this time, so I don't know why that would make a difference.
What would fix that is to apportion the electoral votes like Nebraska does.
Mhm. That would help.
That would do it.
It would help if they were apportioned by vote, but not by district with gerrymandering. In other words, we got a much higher percentage of Republican leaning congressional districts than Republican voters nationwide.
Yes, yes.
So
I
it
vote,
would have to be a true apportionment and not divided into districts, as I believe Maine and Nebraska have done. But you know that got us a vote in Maine and I guess in Nebraska too. But just doing it by congressional district would not work at all for us because of gerrymandering.
No, it'd have to be by vote.
Well, the
Right.
League of Women
Yeah.
Voters is working on a compact where the person who wins the overall popular vote, your state would make those electors go to that person, no matter how your own people voted. Although this is not ever going to happen unless a Republican wins the popular vote and does not win the electoral vote. So
It hasn't been mentioned, but how significant do you think it was that Kamala was a Black woman and that Americans don't have women presidents?
I think that's very significant. I definitely think that was important. Both of them. Look at the reaction, what happened with the Democrats after we had Obama in. I mean, we lost a lot of people too eventually. So, and there was a lot of, in the country, I think there was a lot of pushback to having Obama, although he got elected, it still had some negative effects on long term because there are a lot of, and definitely women. We still don't have, we still are anti-women.
It seems to me that I need to mobilize some conventional wisdom for my profession. And there's some points in that. One is that we here at Muleskinners are not just Democrats, we are progressive Democrats as a whole, on the whole. And progressives in this country and progressives elsewhere, not just now, but for decades past, frequently suffer from a particular disease, which is they cannot get their act together sufficiently for concerted, concentrated action. And therefore they lose when they shouldn't. It happens partly because different people, it's because the progressive movement is a coalition of different advocates to address different grievances, and they argue endlessly about which is first and which is most important and which is the greatest cause, and never get quite around to what the heck can we do about it. And that's not let's not misunderstand. Most of the problems that that are addressed here, like racism, misogyny, and so forth, can be addressed only if you have multiple generations of effort, and you cannot even accomplish it in 20, 30 years. But when we look at the situation of this moment, which is our trouble, there are two separate issues that I think would be wise to separate. One is, what are the fundamental problems in this society which frustrate our good aims? That's a legitimate question. The other is, why did we lose this particular election? And the answers to those questions may not be the same. The long-term aims are that there are ongoing phenomena in the industrial and post-industrial world, here and elsewhere, regarding the concentration of wealth power, and income. Real income has not increased more than $1 or $2 on average on median across this country in half a century. There has been significant growth, but all that growth and benefit has gone to the upper half and mostly to the upper small percent. And the bottom is persistently suffering and knows it. And Democratic administrations have not corrected this. None until the Biden administration, in fact, in 50 years, made serious and concerted efforts to apply antitrust law. That's just an example of the long-term problems. But the other question is, why do we lose this particular election? And if you look at the numbers, Trump did not do much better in absolute numbers than he did in 2020. It is that Harris and Walz fell significantly behind the accomplishments of Biden and Harris in 2020. Why? Well, I think it's fair to say that Biden was not up to the task anymore of running a national election. And he was never exceptionally good compared to, say, Obama or some others. But he had lost touch with himself and lost touch with the people sufficiently that he was mired in ongoing strife. And that's not surprising. There's a viciousness in the society that turns against those who led them out of a disaster, and we criticize them for not having done enough. But he should have stepped out in 2023, but he didn't. He accomplished nothing after that for the first 2 years. A lot, the first two. A whole lot. And that possibly might have produced somebody who was better skilled than Harris at knowing where the center was in American polity, or one might have taught her that. And Harris failed, and Biden failed. And that's a basic truth about what happened this time. Doesn't look like Trump was any better, but he wasn't much worse. And he sure had a grasp of where the center was. And that's where close elections are won or lost. The candidate that is closest to the center in divided polity invariably wins, or when it's perceived to be. And Trump managed to pull that off, and Harris and Walz did not.
But you know, Democrats, what you're saying is absolutely right on concentration of wealth, power, income. But people voted for, if they voted Republican, they voted for the party that should have been most associated with that disparity. And somehow Democrats failed to make that point, by a wide margin, they failed to make that point. And it's true that Biden really was the best of any Democrat in addressing this, but it's still more a Republican thing than a Democratic thing to move money from the poor to the rich, and that is actually part of Trump's platform this time too.
I'm sorry, but on a real simplistic level, I go to the store and groceries cost more. Biden is president, therefore I don't want another Democrat in there. I want my groceries to cost less. Period. I think we're up here, and I think the real world is like at the grocery store.
Try to afford an avocado in a year.
And indeed, a number of the positions that Harris took earlier in her career, of which she was remembered, and she was satirized on right-wing radio, communications, and everything, were albatross around her neck as she tried to seek the center in this election. Biden, remember, never had a reputation as an outstanding national leader, politically, administratively competent, legislatively effective, and so forth, but not politically the best of the bunch. And that showed up over and over in his various forays to look for higher office, even in his the initial phases of the 2020 primaries. He got through in part because the other candidates disproportionately represented the left wing of the Democratic Party, and he was closer to the center. And got away with it in 2020, but did not get away with it this time. He was not exceptional. Harris, at this stage, did not prove to be exceptional either, and that was not good enough.
I think another thing is that Trump had gotten a lot of visibility in certain quarters for having had a TV show for so long. And I think that he also learned how to keep the media on him no matter what. And I think those are things that are hard to fight with the current situation of having newspapers kind of fading away for the most part, and not having good TV news coverage.
Yeah, Kathy?
Read it again.
Kathy?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up what I was saying about Trump knowing how to keep the media on him. The media has really been complicit in that too, in terms of following, for instance, what you were citing as following Trump to the Notre Dame rededication instead of following President Biden. You know, President Biden is still the president, and the media knew that they kind of made Trump last time, and that they really helped get him elected. Stations like CNN and some of the other cable networks, but they haven't corrected. And so I think we need to complain to them about this. And yet I don't know if it'll do any good, but I certainly think we ought to complain to them about this.
You know, one of the only slightly exaggerated memes about mainstream coverage of the election is that appropriate level for Harris was to produce a 233-page paper on exactly how she would improve the economy. Appropriate for Trump being able to say his own name, and this is the mainstream media, and I don't know whether that comes from. I don't know where that comes from, whether that is coming from the pressure that behind the scenes even the mainstream media are owned by the oligarchs, as Dave Taylor puts it. But it's a very, very difficult situation to escape from. Herb, you mentioned to me on election night, talked about education, and Dave Taylor just mentioned that too. Would either of you like to expound a little bit more on that?
Education.
And it seems like we learned about, civic pride and appropriateness of how government's supposed to work and all that. Is that no longer going on?
I don't remember exactly what I may have passed then, but there are a few points that probably are good to remember. One is that most people in this country still do not complete a college education. It's 35%, somewhere in that range, who do. A slightly larger number try it and do not complete. But that leaves 65% or so of the public which is not college educated. And so if you predicate your campaign upon what can reach the college educated, you're missing out on the bulk of the people. It's worse than that, of course, because a very large number of Americans drop out of the education realm effectively, even though they may get diplomas, probably in the range of 30 to 35% of Americans learn nothing in school in their teen years. I mean, absolutely nothing, disproportionately in small town and rural America and some parts of central cities.
Let Dave Taylor go.
Yeah, that was my point. I remember when I was a kid, we learned in grade school, you know, fifth, sixth, seventh grade, we had classes in civics, and definitely in high school. And you learn about bicameral legislatures and how the government works and the separation of powers and the Constitution, which we actually had to read. And we had tests on it, and we learned how it works, and it's just not happening anymore. My kid went through grade school and high school in the early 2000s to 2015, and I think they probably had about 15 minutes of civics and all of that, and then went to college and law school, and they never even had to read the Constitution. It's a different world, and people don't understand what the government is or how it's supposed to work.
Well, Dave, your experience was in Detroit, right? Your education?
Yeah, back when Detroit had fabulous public schools, I admit.
And mine was in Connecticut and Maryland, and my experiences were similar, but I don't know whether education in rural areas in the South and Midwest was similar to the ones we got, or whether Mary Jo does. So, what do you think?
Well, I think we were educated in Kansas and Missouri. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wonder, sometimes I wonder if we're talking here and there or then and now, but I think we probably are talking about then and now. And
I think it's
why,
done
and why
now.
is that? How have we gotten that way?
STEM.
What?
The emphasis is on it's not on sociology and political science anymore. It's on science, technology, and math.
Can I jump
Well,
in?
if so, then why is everybody why are the Republicans anti-science, and how does that get them any kind of support at all?
Is it okay if I jump in?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, this is Sarah. You know, I can say for having a kid who's a senior and a sophomore and a sixth grader, there is a required class in high school still. It's a one semester class, it's one credit that every high school student has to pass in order to graduate. That's civics based, basically. It's, you know, about the Constitution and the House of Representatives and all that. They cover the basics. So like that box is sort of getting checked, but you know, there has been a concerted effort over decades that we're just really seeing the fruition of now, of trying to undercut public education, disrespect teachers, disrespect their role in our society, underpay them, strap them into teaching to these ridiculous tests that don't educate at all. All they do is measure, but they're just measuring and measuring and measuring, and there's no time to actually do any educating because they're all having to teach to this test or they lose their jobs if the students don't do well. Textbooks that have actual, you know, modern textbooks, new textbooks that have lies in them that the teachers are forced to use, historical lies and omissions, and or textbooks that are so old and outdated that the countries don't even have the right names and the maps are wrong. I mean, so this is, you know, public education has been under attack for a very, very, very long time. Look at school vouchers and where we are now with that. So, you know, we wonder how we got here. Well, this is it. I mean, this was not an accident. This was, I think, a concerted plan, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, by a lot of people over a long time to privatize education so that the haves who can afford it get this great, you know, private education, and the have-nots can just slave away in factories. I mean, we're trying to go back, right? Not we, but someone. The haves are trying to push us back into that. And so it's not surprising to me at all that people don't understand how government works or have any interest in it or think it has anything to do with them. And I think Mary Jo is absolutely right. The majority of voters, if we could even get them to show up to vote, what they're aware of is how much they paid for eggs, how much their car insurance is, the fact that they lost their house because they had a medical emergency and didn't have health insurance. I mean, that's the things that affect them. They could care less about power struggles and, you know, philosophical discussions and 330-page papers. I mean, they're struggling and just trying to make ends meet. And that's what they're thinking about when they go to the ballot box. I agree.
Thank you, Sarah, for agreeing with me. And also, thanks for putting sexism in the chat.
Well, I spelled it
it's
wrong the
really
first time.
important.
That's when somebody said, you know, why did she have to do a 330-page paper and all he had to do was be able to pronounce his name? Well, it might have been some racism, but it's definitely sexism. Different standards. We women know it. We've lived it all our lives, right? Being held to a different standard, having to work twice as hard to make half as much. Yeah, she's no different. She's still female, even though she's running for president.
Kathy?
Yeah,
Blake?
David.
Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just noticing David Robinson says sometimes you can even take civics online, and so maybe you're not even paying attention. You're just gaming the test if you're a student in order to check the box so you can graduate. You're not really being engaged. Oh, and then I didn't even say this part. Teachers have been muzzled, right? Like I know Mackenzie Everett Kennedy, who teaches some of these classes here at Hickman, is a brilliant teacher and would do a really great course if she was allowed to, but there's things that she's muzzled and is not even allowed to say, you know? For fear
That's
of
true here.
losing her
That's true here in
job.
Columbia, huh?
Yeah, at Hickman. So I don't know.
Like what?
Just, you know, well, I mean, how about the whole critical race theory, right? Oh, they're teaching critical race theory to fourth graders. No, they are not. But, you know, not being allowed to bring up racism, not being allowed to say anything that might make a white kid feel bad about the fact that some of their ancestors might have been, you know, slaveholders. I mean,
And that's here in Columbia. Imagine what that's like in
everywhere.
Potosi and La Plata and
Georgia and, you know, this whole state
Salem.
of Georgia. Yeah. Yep. Okay. I'm off my soapbox. Somebody else have a turn. I guess Kathy's had her hand up for a while.
Well, I was just going to say that there was a blatant example on Wednesday when the engineer spoke to the League of Women Voters about the I-70 expansion. He kept saying the governor gave them the money to do this, gave MoDOT the money to do this. You know, it was the appropriation of the legislature of public money, taxpayers' money, and maybe some grants from federal level, which is also taxpayers' money. But that disconnect, it was just noticeable that he kept saying the governor gave them the money to do the MoDOT expansion of I-70.
Bert?
I think it's subjectively the case that a very large fraction of the American public is effectively uneducated by the standards that we'd like to expect, even below the level of a true high school education. I don't know whether the problem is the teachers primarily, however. The statistics are daunting. The median, now let me put it differently, 54% of American adults read at sixth grade level or below by numerous studies. It's a firmly established number. Numerosity, mathematical competence, is typically below the level of any algebra, any geometry, or any trigonometry, and is better estimated as about the median as about fifth grade. That's a problem, but it's not new. We have always had that problem in this country. We just have not fixed it. And a goodly portion do something else than learn in their teen years, particularly boys. And that's well established too, and well documented in the studies done by the US military as they tried in the late 1970s to raise the level of entrance to the armed services. I think that we must recognize that we never have invested in public schools across this nation to the extent we pretend we would like to do. Thomas Dewey wrote 100 and some years ago that the challenge of the classroom is such that only the highly gifted should be entrusted with the task. But there are not enough such people to fill the classrooms. So we must train the merely gifted to emulate the highly gifted. And we ask far too much of teachers, way beyond just teaching knowledge. So but even if it is a problem partly of the teaching force and what they're permitted to do not think that you can change this nationally in anything less than 20, 30 years. Because you must recruit a whole new set of people with different standards, different expectations, and so forth, if you can. So we should be thinking of this as a long-term problem, not a solution, without an easy, quick solution, and focus on the issues that we could change now that might lead us to be able to revise and improve programs for the long-term benefit.
I think it goes back to what Kathy said earlier. 95% of teenagers have some degree, and usually quite a high degree of involvement with the social media. And I think that's as important or more important to talk about than education these days. And I say that as an educator.
Yeah, Democrats, I hate to use the term, but Democrats need to do a better job at branding themselves. And use the social media term. Let's see. Peter, would you like to elaborate on what you just said on the chat? Or Steve Calloway, you've certainly got the experience with education too. I'd love to hear your perspective on these things.
No, I'm just saying that the teachers are in a bad position, and we should acknowledge that the situation they're working with is suboptimal. And I personally felt like I had a very good civics education in Columbia Public Schools.
Dave Mallory?
Yes, I'm trying to find the best way to consolidate my thoughts here, but it was said earlier, I think it might have been Herb, that about a third of Americans tend to vote Democratic, and about a third of Americans have higher education. So it sounds to me, I don't have statistics to back all this up, but it seems to me like the people who are going to vote Democratic are going to vote Democratic. We don't need to speak to those people. We need to speak to the people in the middle. And I think Trump does a much better job of speaking to the people who are lower educated. We need candidates who can speak to those people in the middle and speak to their needs. Their politics is local, someone mentioned earlier. So I mean, that's the thing. If we get candidates who speak to the educated people, they'll get the educated votes. And there's only about a third of them. If we want to win, we got to reach the people in the middle. That was one of the things specifically Dave Rathel and I would discuss. Dave Rathel has a PhD, right? Plus, a lot of what he sent out, I thought I had a hard time reading. I had to go look up words, and he was speaking to educated people. Okay, if you think you can win with 25% of the vote, okay, speak to only those people. But I think Trump has that charismatic approach that he says stupid things, but he says them in a cute way, and he appeals to those people who aren't highly educated, and then there's a lot of them. That's my feeling on it.
Very good point.
Could I quickly add, in support of David's great point, that Obama got it better than Biden, much better than Harris. Harris made far too many errors in whom she spoke to in the campaign. She can't be entirely faulted. She didn't have a chance to learn. She wasn't given much time, but that's the way it was.
I don't think that Donald Trump speaks in a cute way. I think Donald Trump speaks in a crass, abusive, self-congratulatory is a euphemism for the way he refers to himself. He's really a monstrous and I would say evil kind of representation that appeals to people. And I really think that, once this has happened, he's been reelected, we can't call it an accident, or if only the Democrats had done this, blah, blah, blah. It's what people wanted. And I think it is the long term that we have to think about. I really like those talks about the long term, although I don't think we have to wait 30 years for something to change. I think things are going to change in disastrous ways, and somebody has to be ready with a message to try to help put it together. Biden did that in the disaster of COVID. And there's going to be other disasters coming with people like Trump. I just feel it in my bones. We'll be very lucky if it doesn't happen. And people are going to have to learn how depraved they are and how they listen to liars. You know, I'm sorry, I'm kind of got this Calvinist background behind me that pushes me, and that people are getting what they deserve. And we can't make everything nice for them by our education. In fact, our education should be to explain to them how depraved they are. So I'm much too radical to have this discussion with any of you, I think. I want to go pretty far down when I talk about these things. I really think there is a disaster in education. You're talking about all the right things, but is this going to change anything? The only thing that's going to change anything is utter disaster. And our system is, you know, we have a lot of money in the United States. We can make a lot of mistakes and not have to pay too much for them. Or if we have to pay a whole lot for them, we pay. But I don't know. I think the likes of Trump is capable of letting really terrible. Well, we saw with COVID what it could do, and I think that's, and it won't be 30 years, Herb, before it changes. It'll have to change because there will be a disaster. There wasn't 30 years in the 1930s. There was about, I don't know, 10 or 15. But yeah, it does take time. It does take time.
Sue or Herb?
It's Sue for a change. I want to say, on a slightly different part, I think what our country is, in order to help the general population, I think we need to go in more of a socialist way and get to be more like Canada. And the fact that I have the relatives up there has made me feel this for some time. But if we had universal health, if you had the safety net for so many people, that would help not just the poorest, but would help the middle income. When I had the TAVR procedure, which is I got a pig valve, but they had to still have the people that it went up through the groin, but they still had to have the doctors in there to do the procedure by breaking the chest. So I had double amount of people, doctors in there and staff in the operating room. The bill was $1.25 million. What was paid by my insurance company and Medicare was $250,000. What does that say? It says that procedure alone, you either couldn't get it or that basically it would bankrupt almost all Americans to have that procedure. If we had that, if we had paid long maternity leave like they do in Canada, they have 1 year. Either spouse, they can share it. If a company lets somebody go, they have to do severance pay when they don't have to in America. There are all sorts of safety nets. And so those people, and one thing, if you have universal health, people tend to go earlier to seek their health problems. And you're likely to be able to solve or push back many of your health issues if you're seeking care early rather than postponing it until it's a real crisis. Anyway, you have all these safety nets so that people can live and not be threatened quite so much by what these daily things of. I know I agree about the grocery store and what the price of gas is and all that definitely influences. But if you know that you have more safety nets, I think that the quality of life would definitely be better.
David, I want to thank, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, Herb.
I want to thank you, David, for emphasizing the significance of the long-term issues. You are damned right there. My real point, or intended point, is that you can't assume that by focusing on them alone, we can make things right. Before you can institute the kinds of programs that I personally would love to see, such as, to name a few, 100% complete confiscatory inheritance taxes to avoid the transfer of wealth in post lifetime, are things that would never fly. But in order to do anything good, first you have to win. And that is the simple point. So you can't assume that one of these alone is going to solve the issue. Keep in mind the issues and have some preparation, yes. But first you got to figure out how to win again before we can put these things in place.
And I think we have a lot of reasons why we lost. Certainly enough to more than account for the percentage of voters that voted for Harris being less than those that voted for Biden. And
I think we can say that Democrats win accidentally when the Republicans have messed up because they basically got it all wrapped up in their system. Obama won because people were really tired of some very terrible wars. And remember how hard he campaigned on that and then didn't stop those wars. But nevertheless, that was his campaign. And Biden won because of the pandemic. I don't think there was any other reason he could have won. Trump was going to win it just like he finally did. So Democrats lose these days, unless the Republicans have produced some kind of disaster. Because otherwise they've got it sewed up. They've got the lies that people want to hear.
It's also true, your point is well taken. It's also true that Barack Obama came under very great criticism from people of our position, David, for not being progressive enough on social and economic issues. And that was, from all we can tell from the biographies and so forth, was deliberate.
So this is Steve.
It's complicated.
This is Steve. I was going to go ahead and, if it's okay if I weigh in. I'm sorry,
Please.
I can't turn my video. Can't turn my video on. I'm on a different platform kind of here, and I don't have a camera. But let me just. So I appreciate everything that everybody said, and I'm truly listening intently. Let me just kind of be transparent and upfront. So number one, when I look at the call and I see who all's on here on the meeting, there's nobody that looks like me. And I hang on because I appreciate the people that are here. But if these if you guys are enthusiastic and justice-seeking folk, we need more folk. And I think we need something that attracts people of color and actually people of all ilks, I'll just say, all manner of persuasions and things. Then I think we need to do a better job of that. And whether that we say that's the Democrats or whatever. Let me just say, when it comes to talking about Democrats who typically appeal to people of color, I think our message is missing to folks. Some of that I think is education. Back when I was involved with public school system, one of the things that I really was frustrated about young people is these kids skipping classes and not wanting to go to school and all that sort of stuff. That's ridiculous. As hard as the battles were fought to gain access to public schools so people could go to school, kids didn't understand or appreciate how hard those battles were and the value of being able to go to school and get education. And the education is the key. So that's part of why I work, myself, Wiley Miller, we work with the Minority Men's Network, and we focus on education. And public education, I agree, folks have mentioned that, it's part of the master plan of the other side to destroy public education and let education only be for those who can afford it. So then you got the issues of classisms. So our isms, sexism, somebody mentioned, racism is there, classism, all of those isms is there, religiosityism, that's probably not a word, but that's part of the issue as well, right? So I think all those things are kind of colliding to create a problem for trying to reach people, and all of it obfuscates the issues that we should really want government to work on. So people, and some of that is generational, the Xers maybe, I don't want to name generations per se, but some of it's generational. People don't believe that government can work. They don't believe the things that only government can do, like building roads, like building public education and facilities and providing public education. They don't believe in government anymore, and they don't believe in expertise, and they don't believe in law enforcement. All these different things they don't believe in. And so I think that's a problem. And then lastly, I'll just mention about the media. So first of all, we have never had somebody like Donald Trump. The media was constantly getting punked by Donald Trump. Donald Trump was a cash cow for them, and it made me sick for every night to talk about Donald Trump. I don't want my president to be in the news every day. That's not who I want to hear about every day and what he's doing. And it's not that you're hearing the good stuff he's doing, you're hearing about his tactics and his antics, and part of that is he's an entertainer. We want to be entertained is what happens. We want to be entertained, and that's where we're at. Donald Trump fulfills that to a T. He can say the most outrageous things, and people are like, they love it. They love it. Give me more. Give me more. And those of us on the call, I think I appreciate that people who understand about history and understand civics and stuff like that understand. I mean, if I go all the way back to Ronald Reagan, right? I still think about in Back to the Future when Michael J. Fox goes back and he tells him that Ronald Reagan is president. And the guy says, the actor? And so the idea that an actor, that anybody could be president, and Reagan, I still remember Reagan from Trickle Down. That was not a good time for Black folk. That wasn't a good time for people. And so the idea that we constantly, we constantly have people who vote against their own interests is the result of, I think, a master strategy to obfuscate, to confuse people, to use all the isms to keep people from getting forward. And all of it works to have people not have confidence in government, to not have confidence in authority. I hate our legislature down in Jeff City, the stuff that they try to do, and yet we keep sending them back. So my last part of that is that the medium, I say medium, medium versus media, and it's related. But here's the thing. I heard a guy, so there's a guy named David Pakman. I don't know if you guys have heard of him, but he's an independent, progressive podcaster, for lack of a better term. And he's noted that if you look at MSNBC and CNN, their viewership has gone down significantly. And part of the issue with that is, one, people are frustrated. They're like, I'm going to take a break. That's one thing. But also, those outlets have not served the progressive side of politics. They didn't prepare us for what was coming. They were on a certain trajectory in terms of messaging that was not reaching everybody. It wasn't reaching people. And so I think people want to be told the truth. Those of us on this side of the aisle, I think, want to be told the truth. Folks on the other side just want to be entertained. And I think that what we're going to see going forward, I don't think people are going to go back to CNN and MSNBC in general until they kind of change how they talk about our politics. And rather than talking about our politics, let's talk about how we get forward. Let's talk about how we actually, I like the term progressive. Progressive means making progress. And that's what I think we really need to do. In terms of Black folks, interestingly, when Trump first got elected, I still remember a skit on Saturday Night Live, and they were talking about how folks were, crying and all upset and all, about getting Trump elected. But people like that and things like that and Supreme Court stuff and all those kinds of things, they are not, Black folks been dealing with this stuff for many years in terms of disappointments by our government, disappointments by our political systems and all those kinds of things. And so while I think it's pretty severe having Trump in there, and I think there's a lot of harm and danger that can come from it, it's just one more thing. The idea that half of our population would actually choose Donald Trump was the thing that hurt me the most. That bothered me tremendously. That was the most disappointing thing to me, was that how could somebody elect him over anybody? I would have taken Biden like on a stretcher, as long as it wasn't Trump. But then I still, to Herb's point, the difference between just winning and actually getting forward, those are not the same thing. They're not the same thing. So I'm good with let's win first, but then we still got a lot of work to do with trying to actually be progressive and get forward.
I might just make one. Thank you very much, Steve. I want to make one thing. I think the comment about how much you're paying at the grocery store, one of the things that I tell people, I don't know how many of you gotten an automobile insurance bill recently, and I don't know which car it was, but it was $750 for 6 weeks. And I'm thinking 6 months. And that twice a year. So that's $1,500. Our county, our taxes that we sent in, not including the cars, was around $2,000. So what kind of value am I getting from that damn insurance compared to what I'm getting from my local government? And I'm telling this to a lot of people because I think they just need to start thinking about you get much more for your taxes than you do anything else that you spent.
I really appreciate all of the inputs, especially yours, Steve. What you said is exactly what I thought is, yeah, we can talk about how to win an election and we need to do that, but we need to figure out why half of the people even would consider voting for Donald Trump. And I'm not sure we've solved it here today, but I think we need to work in both areas, both in terms of winning elections, but also I guess we need a Democratic equivalent of ALEC, trying to strategize and how you change people's minds and ideas or get them back to the way people were thinking like 40, 50 years ago, just broadly in terms of what our society should look like. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to do this. I just been thinking that sometimes we just needed a time for us to express our opinions and kind of get ourselves thinking a little bit better and try to figure out how we can provide more influence to the whole system at large. So thank you very much.
We have a meeting.
And with that, I think we should go into the business part of our meeting.
We need to observe it.
And Pam, do you have announcements?
Well, before we do announcements, should we do the business part with